Is this dirty coin really worth $100,000? Welcome back to the Daddy Cent Profile. Today, I'm showing you two old American coins that may look dirty, worn, and easy to ignore, but sometimes the most forgotten coins carry the biggest surprises. One is a 1964 Lincoln cent, and the other is a 1969 Jefferson nickel. At first glance, they may seem ordinary, but their age, condition, possible varieties, and hidden collector details can tell a very different story. Before you decide they are just old pocket change, watch closely, because by the end of this video, you may see these coins in a completely new way. At first glance, a 1964 Lincoln cent that looks dirty, dark, and heavily worn can feel like a hidden treasure from the past. And in one sense, it is. It is a real vintage American coin from the Denver Mint, struck in 1964 with the classic Lincoln portrait on the front and the Lincoln Memorial on the back. This coin was made of 95% copper and 5% zinc, weighs 3.11 grams, and more than 3.799 billion were struck. That huge mintage means one important thing. Age alone does not make this penny rare. If your coin looks rusted, that is usually not true rust, because the coin is not made of iron. What people often call rust on a cent is usually corrosion, staining, or environmental damage, and that kind of damage normally lowers the value instead of raising it. So let's be honest about the kind of coin you have. If your 1964 cent is very dirty, dark brown, spotted, scratched, or damaged by moisture, it usually stays in the lowest value category. One appraisal source lists the approximate current value of an ordinary 1964 cent at about 1 cent, and that matches the reality that most heavily circulated examples are extremely common. In other words, a worn and damaged coin is usually interesting as an old coin, but not expensive as a collector coin. That is why collectors do not pay strong money just because a penny looks old. They pay for rarity, originality, eye appeal, and certified high grade. Now here is where the story changes. The 1964 Lincoln cent becomes more valuable when it survives in bright red, uncirculated condition. In the current market, a 1964 cent is tracked at about $20 in MS65, about $30.97 in MS66, and about $259.13 in MS67. Those numbers can move over time, but they show the jump clearly. Once a coin reaches gem quality, every small mark matters. PCGS says the 1964 is common up to MS64, a little harder in MS65, scarce in MS66, and in MS67 it becomes one of the tougher Denver dates of the 1960s, with fewer than 2 dozen known at that level and none graded higher in that PCGS narrative. So when people hear that a 1964 penny sold for serious money, it is usually not a dirty jar coin. It is a sharply struck, red, certified gem. That brings us to circulated versus uncirculated value. In circulated condition, especially when the coin is dull or damaged, the value is usually about face value or only a tiny premium. In uncirculated condition, the value starts to improve. USA Coin Book gives a broad estimate of about 18 cents to $1.24 or more for uncirculated examples, and then the price climbs much higher when the coin reaches elite certified grades like MS65, MS66, and MS67. So for a normal collector guide, the message is simple: circulated and damaged coins stay low, nicer mint state coins move up, and top certified red pieces make the real jump. That is the difference between an old cent and a collectible cent. Now let's talk about the big auction numbers, because this is where many people get excited. The overall PCGS auction record for a 1964 regular strike cent is $4,025 for an MS67 example sold by Stack's Bowers in 2012. That is a real headline price, but it belongs to a top-grade coin, not a corroded one. There are also notable auction sales for mint errors. A 1964 cent struck 70% off center sold for $65 in 2022. Another 60% off center MS65 red example sold for $126 in 2017. And a much more dramatic 1964 struck on a silver dime planchet sold for $596.90 in 2013. So yes, The date can produce exciting results, but the excitement comes from exceptional grade or genuine mint error, not from ordinary wear. The final truth is powerful and simple. Your 1964 D Lincoln cent may be old, and it may look impressive because it has survived for decades, but if it is very dirty and rusted looking, it is probably worth only a cent or a very small amount above that. Still, you should not clean it. Cleaning can permanently damage the surface and make it less desirable. Instead, check for unusual features: a strong off-center strike, a clipped planchet, doubling that looks real, or an unusual weight. If none of that is present, then the coin is best appreciated as a historic copper cent rather than a major rarity. But if it turns out to be a true error or a surprisingly sharp red coin, then the story changes fast. That is what makes the 1964 D Lincoln cent so interesting. Most are common, but the right one can still surprise you. At first glance, a dirty 1969 Jefferson 5-cent nickel can look like nothing special. It may be dark, worn, stained, and so old that many people would toss it aside without a second thought. But that is exactly what makes this coin interesting. Sometimes an old nickel is just a common survivor from circulation, and sometimes it becomes a collector piece because of grade, strike, or a real mint error. The key is knowing the difference before you judge it too quickly. The first thing to understand is this. In 1969, Jefferson nickels for circulation were struck only at Denver and San Francisco. That means your coin should have either a D or an S mint mark above the date. CoinWeek notes that no nickels were struck in Philadelphia in 1969 or 1970. A 1969 D nickel has a mintage of 202,807,500, and PCGS lists its composition as 75% copper and 25% nickel, with a weight of 5.00 grams and a diameter of 21.20 millimeters. So if your coin looks rusted, that usually is not true rust. It is more likely corrosion, dirt, staining, or environmental damage, and collectors usually do not reward that kind of damage with high prices. Now let's talk honestly about value. If your 1969 Jefferson nickel is heavily circulated, dirty, and damaged, it is usually a very low-value coin. CoinWeek says a circulated 1969 D is worth its face value of 5 cents, and in GC's 2026 guide for both the 1969 D and 1969 S puts circulated examples broadly around 10 to 20 cents. In real-world terms, a dark and ugly coin is usually at the bottom of that range, often just face value. So if your nickel is old and rough but otherwise normal, it is more a historic pocket coin than a jackpot coin. Where the story changes is in uncirculated grade. If your coin turns out to be a 1969 D, current market tracking shows about $15.56 in MS65, $23.97 in MS66, and about $26 in MS67. PCGS adds an important detail. The 1969 D is very common in all grades up to and including MS66, and none have been certified finer by PCGS. That tells you something powerful. The regular 1969 D nickel is common, but truly elite examples still matter because condition is everything. If your coin is a 1969 S, the market can look stronger in top grades. Current market tracking shows roughly $13.39 in MS65, $36 in MS66, and $154.17 in MS67. PCGS says the 1969 S is common in mint state but usually appears in MS64 to MS65, with MS66 becoming semi-scarce, and only one MS67 listed in its top population narrative. That means a 1969 S in ordinary shape is nothing dramatic, but a high-grade example can become a much more serious collector coin. Now comes the part that makes people stop and pay attention: auction records. PCGS lists the regular strike 1969 D auction record at $3,120 for an MS67 example, sold through Heritage on May 4, 2025. That is already a huge jump from face value. But the Real headline belongs to the famous 1969 D full steps rarity. PCGS says only one example has earned the full steps designation there, and that coin sold for $33,600 in Stack's Bowers' August 2021 ANA sale. PCGS also notes that this single full steps coin came from a mintage of more than 202 million pieces, which shows how one tiny detail can turn a common date into a major trophy coin. And then there are the real mint errors, which many people casually call misprints. Heritage sold a 1969 D incomplete curved clip graded MS65 for $172.50. A 1969 D struck on a dime planchet graded MS64 sold for $373.75. And a 1969 D struck on a cent planchet graded MS65 red and brown sold for $460. These are the kinds of mistakes that can make a normal-looking date become exciting. But the important lesson is this: dirt is not an error, damage is not an error, and corrosion is not an error. True value comes from a real mint mistake, a top-certified grade, or extraordinary strike detail. So the final truth is simple. If your 1969 Jefferson nickel is dirty, dark, and rusted-looking, it is probably worth only face value to a very small premium unless it has something special. Do not clean it. Cleaning can make an old coin even less desirable. Instead, check the mint mark, study the steps on Monticello, look for unusual weight, clipped edges, off-metal color, or a strange strike. Most 1969 nickels are ordinary survivors. But the right one, the sharp one, the error coin, the elite grade piece can surprise you in a big way.